In my last life, my best friend, the sole heiress to a billionaire's empire, stole my husband. They mocked me, degraded me, and eventually they pushed me down a flight of stairs, leaving me to bleed out on the cold marble floor. Given a second chance, I set my sights on a different prize. Her wealthy, silver fox of a father. He had no biological heirs, only his adopted daughter. She thought her father's empire made her invincible, giving her the right to play God with my life. But she didn't know about my family secret. I possessed a rare genetic predisposition for extreme fertility. Soon enough, I'd be slipping into his bed, carrying his quadruplets. In this life, I'm going to make you drop to your knees and call me mother. I feigned a hazy disorientation, stumbling my way toward the master suite on the second floor of the mansion. Richard Kerwin stood there in a plush robe, silver-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. When he saw me, burst in surprise flashed across his face, quickly followed by a cold, guarded mask. I played the part of the innocent, drunken guest, perfectly bumping into his solid chest and letting out a soft, incoherent murmur. At this point in my timeline, my body hadn't yet been ravaged by the grueling rounds of IVF hormone injections. I was still in my prime, radiant, vibrant, and undeniably alluring. Silky strands of my hair brushed against his fingers. A delicate, intoxicating perfume drifted into the air between us, sinking right into his veins. The man's eyes darkened instantly. Every single detail of this moment, the precise length of my slip dress, the plunge of the neckline, the slit at my thigh, even the breathy cadence of my voice had been meticulously calculated. Because I knew that if I missed this window, I might never get close to him again. I watched his Adam's apple bob. The icy restraint in his gaze was rapidly melting, replaced by a raw, primal heat. Suddenly, his arms came around me, pulling me flush against him. I could feel the searing heat radiating from his skin and the frantic, heavy thud of his heartbeat. He leaned down, his voice a low, gravelly whisper against my ear. Do you have any idea what you're doing right now? In that split second, the sheer weight of his hunger washed over me. I smiled inwardly, checkmate. The next morning, a piercing shriek shattered the silence. Helen, what the hell are you doing? That is my father. Bernice stood paralyzed in the doorway. Behind her, a small crowd of guests from her birthday party the night before lingered in the hall, their faces a canvas of shock and morbid curiosity. I blinked up at her with wide, innocent eyes, pulling the duvet tightly up to my collarbone, deliberately cutting off whatever explanation Richard was about to offer. I was just so drunk last night, I stammered, my voice trembling perfectly. We just laid here and talked under the covers. Nothing happened, I swear. I knew how the game was played. A ruthless, highly respected titan of Wall Street was never going to let himself become the punchline of a society scandal. Especially not with half of New York's elite standing in his hallway. Bernice's face morphed from sheer shock to a violent, trembling rage. She ground her teeth, her eyes practically vibrating with hatred. Do you think I'm a fucking idiot? She lunged forward, hands raised to strike me. Enough! Richard's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Bernice froze. Did you not hear what she just said? Richard demanded, his tone brokering no argument. It was a misunderstanding. An accident. Bernice stared at him, utterly betrayed, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a rebuttal. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us until my lips were inches from her ear. You'd better play along with my story, I whispered, so low only she could hear. Because if your dad decides he actually does have a taste for me, you're going to have to start calling me Mom. Her pupils dilated in pure horror. A flicker of profound hesitation crossed her face. Finally, she shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, then whipped around to face her guests, forcing a sickeningly sweet, plastic smile onto her face. Everyone please, let's not jump to conclusions. They really just stayed up talking. The guests exchanged awkward, knowing glances, muttering polite excuses as they quickly dispersed down the hall. Before Bernice walked away, she turned and glared at me one last time. It was the exact same look she had given me in my past life, right before she shoved me to my death. I was born in an isolated, forgotten valley deep in the mountains, a place locals whispered about in folklore. The women from my hometown were famously beautiful, but more importantly, we were known for a fierce, generational vitality. We were built to bear children, effortlessly and abundantly. Because of that trait, I was nearly trafficked 3 times as a toddler, eventually ending up in the foster care system, which is where I first met Bernice. Back in the foster home, while the other kids were sickly and hollow-cheeked, I was thriving, radiant, and healthy. The system wasn't some magical sanctuary. It was a brutal competition for survival, and amid all that ugliness, Bernice was the only one who looked out for me. There were always families who wanted to adopt me, but somehow at the very last second, the paperwork would always fall through. Not long after, Bernice hit the jackpot. She was taken in by Richard Kerwin, the legendary corporate shark. I had been genuinely happy for her. I truly believed she was my sister, the most important person in my life. I believed it so deeply that in my previous life, when Bernice stood in my living room, caressing her swelling belly and telling me she was carrying my husband's baby, my brain simply couldn't process it. They stood there together, laughing at me. They called me a barren, useless husk. And when I finally snapped, threatening to take my husband for every penny he had in the divorce, they dragged me to the staircase. When I opened my eyes again, I was back. Back before the blood, before the betrayal. Realizing that the two people you trusted most in the world were the architects of your destruction, it's a suffocating, paralyzing kind of agony, and agony so deep that in my last life I died before I could even scream the truth at them. The problem wasn't me. The one who was medically sterile was my husband. My bloodline practically guaranteed fertility. I had spent years bearing the truth, silently taking the blame, and enduring endless pity, just to protect his fragile male ego. Well, no more. Bernice thought she could play with human lives just because she had a billionaire daddy backing her up. She loved my useless, sterile husband so much. Fine. She could keep the trash. I, on the other hand, thought her father was quite the catch. Wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and completely alone save for one adopted daughter. Let's see how much he remembers you, Bernice, once I give him a biological child of his own blood. In this life, you will drop to your knees and call me mother. By the time Richard and I were dressed and making our way downstairs, Bernice was already sitting stiffly on the living room sofa, radiating fury. Dad, Helen, now that the guests are gone, do you two have absolutely no sense of shame? Shame? Hilarious. I doubt the word crossed her mind when she was climbing into my husband's bed in our past life. Swallowing the urge to laugh in her face, I buried my face in my hands and let out a soft, pathetic sob. I don't even know what happened. I cried, my voice thick with tears. I just drank that one cocktail you handed me last night, Bernice, and then everything went blurry. Bernice's righteous anger immediately dissolved into panic. What? Are you trying to say I drugged you? I looked up at her, my eyes swimming with wounded vulnerability. No, of course not. You're my best friend, I would never suspect you, but those people you hang out with, they don't seem like good people. What if one of them slipped something into my glass behind your back? Bernice was turning purple. The elite circles of New York had always quietly shunned her for being an adopted outsider. Getting those socialites to attend her birthday had been a monumental task. You bitch, she hissed. If you want to sleep with my dad, just say it. Stop making up lies. That's enough, Richard interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. He looked at Bernice. She was clearly not in her right mind last night. He rubbed his temples. I thought I raised you better than this. I know what kind of person you are, but I also know I've spoiled you rotten. You've been running around with a degenerate crowd. Your black card is cut off. You're grounded. You will stay in this house. And think about your actions. Dad dash. My decision is final. Bernice let out a scream of frustration and stormed out of the room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving just Richard and me in the cavernous, quiet room. I took a shaky breath, speaking before he could. Richard, Mr. Kerwin. Last night was a mistake. I only came here to celebrate Bernice's birthday. I never imagined things would spiral out of control like this. I let a small, choked gasp escape my lips. But I need you to forget this ever happened. The request caught him completely off guard. He was a billionaire. He was no stranger to women trying to manipulate their way into his bed, but he remembered last night. He remembered that I really was delirious, that I had even tried to push him away a few times. And then he remembered that his own daughter's party guests were likely the cause of it. A rare flicker of guilt crossed his sharp features, his jaw tightened. Whatever compensation you want, he said, quietly, name it, it's yours. I shook my head, offering him a sad, fragile smile. You're a victim in this too. I paused, looking down at my hands. The truth is I'm a married woman, but I don't think I can live with this guilt. I've betrayed my husband, and I need to ask him for a divorce. I looked back up, letting a single tear slip down my cheek, but we built our company together. If he finds out why I'm leaving him, he'll destroy everything I've worked for. My life's work will be gone. Richard stared at me, his expression softening into something entirely new. He reached out his large, warm hand, tentatively resting on my shoulder. I understand, he said softly. Don't worry about the company. What belongs to you will stay yours. I widened my eyes, looking up at him with pure, unadulterated admiration. Thank you, Richard. You really are a good man. I could see the gears turning in his head. To him, I was entirely different from the predatory socialites he was used to. He was the one who had taken advantage of me in my compromised state, yet here, I was thanking him. He walked me to the front doors and instructed his private driver to take me home. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I paused, pretending to remember something. I turned back, accidentally bumping softly against his chest just as I had the night before. Instinctively, his arm came around my waist to steady me. I stepped back quickly, putting a polite distance between us, and carefully handed him my business card. Mr. Kerwin, I said, my voice steady now. I hope we can start over and reintroduce ourselves properly. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other in the boardroom. As the town car pulled away from the estate, I could feel the weight of his lingering stare on the back of my neck. I didn't look back. Since Richard had promised to ensure my divorce went smoothly, I didn't have to waste a single ounce of energy worrying about asset division. I made one phone call and had a team of movers pack up every single thing I owned from the townhouse. I also left a very clear warning for my husband, no my ex-husband. I told him I already had an ironclad file of evidence proving his affair with Bernice, and if he ever showed his face near me again, I'd ruin him. In my past life, I had convinced myself that his infidelity was my fault, a byproduct of my supposed inability to give him a child after years of marriage. But when I woke up in this timeline and hired an investigator, the truth made me sick to my stomach. He and Bernice had been sleeping together since the very beginning. They had played me for a fool for years. You both wanted to play dirty? Fine. Welcome to the mud. Sitting in the quiet of my new apartment, I rested a hand over my flat stomach. I could already feel it. One shot was all it took. A new life was already taking root inside me, waiting for the perfect moment to bloom. For the next month, despite having my card, Richard didn't reach out. I wasn't worried. With Bernice hovering around, she was doing everything in her power to keep her father away from me. But I was supremely confident that Richard couldn't just erase me from his mind. The memory of that night was hammered into his brain like a silver nail, impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work. I was the CEO of my firm, and by pure beautiful coincidence, our upcoming project involved a direct partnership with Kerwin Enterprises. Up until now, all our correspondence had been digital. By the time the in-person summit rolled around, my baby would be exactly 6 weeks along. I ruthlessly polished the project proposals, settling for nothing less than absolute perfection. Leaning back in my ergonomic office chair, I let out a long exhale, quietly thanking the universe for the timing of this rebirth. I was at the absolute peak of my life, young, sharp, and radiant. I hadn't been bullied into quitting my career to focus on IVF. I hadn't spent my days acting as a live-in maid for my horrid mother-in-law. I wasn't bloated, exhausted, and practically gray from the stress of it all. The day of the negotiation, I walked into the Kerwin boardroom wearing a tailored, powder blue power suit, a thick stack of flawless dossiers in my arms. Richard was seated at the head of the long glass table. His eyes were sharp and unyielding, but the second he saw me, a micro-expression of shock cracked his facade. I treated him like a complete stranger. I offered a polite professional smile as I slid the documents across the table toward him. As he reached for the file, his fingertips brushed against mine. I felt the sudden, electric jolt of his body heat, and my heart gave a calculated little flutter. Our eyes locked, and the air in the boardroom suddenly felt incredibly thick. I led the presentation. Derek, my ex-husband, was technically still a partner on paper, but he sat beside me looking like a deer in headlights, muttering useless filler words while I dominated the room. It only served to make my brilliance shine brighter. I yielded no ground during the negotiations. After an hour of intense, exhilarating back and forth, we reached a highly lucrative agreement. The room erupted into polite applause and cheerful corporate pleasantries. As I was packing up my briefcase, preparing to escort them out, Bernice suddenly appeared from the hallway. She grabbed my arm, dragging me into a quiet alcove, her eyes blazing. "Don't think I didn't see you making eyes at my dad in there," she hissed. "Are you still delusional enough to think you're going to be my stepmother?" I smoothed down the lapel of my jacket, my expression perfectly serene. "Whatever do you mean? I was just doing my job. Honestly, instead of obsessing over my love life, you should worry about your own. I've already divorced Derek, so why hasn't he put a ring on your finger yet?" Her face drained of color. She stammered. How did you know? I mean, what kind of crazy nonsense are you talking about?" "You were right about one thing, though," I said, letting a slow, venomous smile spread across my face. "I really want to hear you call me Mom." I paused, leaning in close. "I'm pregnant." I mouthed the next words so only she could read my lips. "With your dad's baby." Bernice's face contorted in sheer, unadulterated madness. She lost her mind. Screaming a string of obscenities, she lunged at me, her manicured hands clawing wildly. I let her push me. I hit the hardwood floor hard, a sharp jolt of pain radiating up my spine. The hallway descended into chaos. Executives shouted. Richard pushed through the crowd, his face pale with panic, and violently yanked Bernice off of me. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard roared. I looked up at him, letting the tears spill over my lashes in a torrential flood. "I don't know," I sobbed, clutching my stomach. "I thought Bernice just wanted to catch up, and then she just attacked me." Bernice pointed a shaking finger at me, hyperventilating. "She's lying. My dad would never. He only wants me. He's not having any more kids. Tell them you're lying about being pregnant." Before she could finish the sentence, Richard's hand connected with Bernice's cheek. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the dead silent hallway. Bernice stumbled back, holding her face in disbelief. You hit me? For her? Richard's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought it might
shatter.
Enough. Not another word. The truth is, Helen and we've been seeing each other since her divorce. Suddenly, one of my assistants gasped, pointing at the floor. Oh my God, she's bleeding. I looked down. A small pool of crimson was seeping into the fabric of my skirt. All the color vanished from Richard's face. Call an ambulance. Now, he bellowed, his voice cracking with terror. At the hospital, the emergency ultrasound confirmed what I already knew. The baby, now exactly 90 days along, was perfectly safe. Richard had been pacing the corridors like a caged animal. When the doctor finally delivered the good news, he slumped into a chair, letting out a long, ragged exhale of pure relief. I reached out from the hospital bed, wrapping my fingers gently around his. I gave him the look of a woman who had just survived a shipwreck. Thank God, I whispered, my voice trembling. Thank God our baby is okay. Richard gripped my hand tightly in both of his. Thank you, Helen, he murmured, his eyes suspiciously bright. Thank you. I'm going to be a father.
It was true what they said.
Blood really was the strongest, most inexplicable pull in the universe. Even in this tender moment, I didn't drop my armor completely. I had to maintain the independent, driven persona that captivated him. Just so we're clear, I said, offering a weak but playful
smile.
The baby gets your last name, but my company doesn't. I'm not giving up a single percentage point on our profit margins. Richard let out a sudden, booming laugh, the tension leaving his shoulders. He reached out and gently tapped my nose. I hear you, you little capitalist. In the corner of the sterile room, Bernice stood rigid, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She watched us exchange affectionate glances with a look of pure, unadulterated poison. Richard's eyes flicked over to her, his expression instantly hardening. He remembered how close she had just come to killing his unborn child. Come here, he commanded coldly. Apologize. Bernice's face twitched. She ground her teeth together, forcing out the words.
Why
should
I?
Bernice Kerwin. It was the first time I had ever heard him use her full
name.
I shook my head slowly, squeezing Richard's hand to calm him down. I looked at Bernice with deep, fabricated sorrow. It's okay, Richard. Bernice and I have been friends for so long, I've always considered her family. I offered Bernice a teary smile. I'm just so happy that we're actually going to be real family now. Not yet, I thought to myself. Now isn't the time to strike the final blow. Even if I was carrying his child, nearly suffering a miscarriage would only buy me a forced apology right now. I needed her to dig her own grave deeper. Bernice let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You really think you've won, don't you? You think getting knocked up automatically makes you the lady of the house? She sneered at her father. Aren't you jumping the gun, Dad? How do you even know the kid is yours? The words hung in the air. A shadow of doubt flickered in Richard's eyes. She had a point. I did have an ex-husband, after all. I looked at Bernice, letting a mask of profound, tragic disappointment slip over my features. I know how you feel about me, Bernice, I said softly, my voice breaking. I know you've always looked down on me because I came from the foster system. I know you think I'm trash, and you hate that your father loves me. I let a single tear fall. But we've known each other for years. You watched me build my company from nothing for you to stand there and call me a gold digger. It breaks my heart. Richard's face softened immediately. He pulled me into a protective embrace. Helen. I wiped away the tear, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. It's fine. I'm used to people underestimating me. But my integrity isn't up for debate. When the baby is born, we will do a paternity test immediately. I turned my gaze back to Bernice, my voice turning to steel. And when that test proves this child is his, I don't want your apologies. I want you to drop to your knees, bow your head to the floor 3 times, and call me mother. If you can do that, I swear I will love you just as fiercely as your father does. Bernice rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath. Keep acting, psycho. She crossed her arms. Fine. If that thing in your stomach actually belongs to my dad, I won't just call you mom. You can have my entire inheritance. I won't take a single dime. Richard agreed to my terms. The paternity test would happen the day the baby was born. To ensure I had a stress-free pregnancy, he moved me directly into the Kerwin master suite. As punishment for her violent outburst, Richard banished Bernice from her luxurious second-floor bedroom, relegating her to a small guest room on the ground floor. It meant I had the pleasure of seeing her venomous glares every time I descended the grand staircase, but I couldn't have cared less. So, you're the adopted billionaire princess, I mused lazily one afternoon as we crossed paths in the foyer. And yet here I am. A booming career, a man who worships me, and a baby on the way. And you? You have a fake title at your dad's company, and the man you stole from me still won't commit to you. Bernice let out a feral noise and raised her hand to shove me. But before she could make contact, Richard stepped out from a study, catching her wrist midair. Bernice, if you show disrespect to your stepmother one more time, you're packing your bags and leaving this house. What? Bernice shrieked, yanking her arm away. She is not my mother. I will never acknowledge this filthy whore as my mother. I pressed myself against Richard's side, burying my face in his chest, shooting her a subtle, victorious smirk. Everything in this house belongs to me now. Bernice stormed out and didn't return for days. That evening, the massive house was quiet. Richard lay on the sofa, his head resting in my lap, looking suddenly older and incredibly tired. Helen, he murmured softly. Bernice's parents, they died saving my life. I've spoiled her since she was a little girl, because of that debt. I used to think I'd never marry. I was prepared to leave my entire empire to her. He closed his eyes, a deep furrow forming between his brows. I gave her the world, but look at her now. Hanging out with degenerates, screaming profanities in the halls, attacking pregnant women, and now she's run off blood. Really, does tell, doesn't it? I gently ran my fingers through his silver hair, my touch light and soothing. It's okay, Richard. That's what parents are for, right? To be their safety net. She's just going through a rebellious phase. She'll grow out of it. He sighed heavily. A rebellious phase? Look at the woman you are, and look at her. I smiled softly. Well, you don't have to worry anymore. You're going to have a child of your own blood now. We can be a little stricter with this one. Richard's eyes fluttered open, a gentle, genuine smile spreading across his face.
Yes,
we will. When Bernice finally returned to the estate, she wasn't alone. She walked through the front doors arm in arm with Derek. She wore a smug, triumphant smirk, as if she had just won a war and was parading her trophy for the world to see. She boldly announced that she and my ex-husband were officially together. Richard had already read the thick investigative file on my divorce. He knew exactly who Derek was and what he had done to me. Seeing his daughter proudly bringing home the garbage I had thrown to the curb triggered a massive migraine. He rubbed his temples, his face pale. I let out a soft sigh, stepping up to Richard's side and gently taking his arm to steady him. Do you have any idea what you're doing right now? Richard asked, his voice dangerously low. Bernice lifted her chin defiantly. I love him. What's the problem? You're allowed to pursue true love, but I'm not. I took a step forward, my voice dripping with fake, maternal concern. Bernice, sweetheart, please stop doing this just to rebel against your dad. Look how sick you're making him. Bernice sneered at me. Shut up. You have no right to speak in this house. She looked back at Richard, her voice rising hysterically. You don't love me anymore. You always take her side. Well, I don't care. I'm marrying Derek, and there's nothing you can do about it. Richard looked like he was about to pass out from the sheer exhaustion of dealing with her. Finally, waving a dismissive hand, he gave up. He told them they could be together, but under one strict condition. There would be no wedding. Richard Kerwin was a man who lived and died by his reputation. The idea of hosting a lavish society wedding where his daughter married his soon-to-be wife's sloppy seconds was entirely out of the question. Humiliated but desperate, Bernice and Derek were forced to quietly sign papers at a courthouse. I knew Derek better than anyone. When I met him, he was a broke, ambitious street hustler. He only got to where he was because I dragged him up the ladder with my bare hands. The only reason he was marrying Bernice now was because he thought he was securing a ticket to the Kerwin billion-dollar fortune. It was almost sad. I hadn't planned on leaving them a single dime. Over the next few months, I stayed constantly by Richard's side. I became his confidant, his sanctuary, his peace. His possessiveness over me grew by the day, until he simply couldn't function without me nearby. Before I knew it, my due date arrived. On the day I went into labor, Bernice stood in the hallway of the VIP maternity ward, arms crossed, loudly mocking my appearance. Look at the size of her, she sneered to a nurse. That doesn't even look like a normal pregnancy. She's probably bloated from a tumor. Greedy snake swallowing an elephant, let's see if she even survives the delivery. Richard heard her. He stopped dead in his tracks, turning to look at his daughter with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. He was entirely done with her. Despite Bernice's curses, the delivery was flawlessly smooth. I brought a medical miracle into the world, 4 perfectly healthy babies. 3 boys and 1 girl. When the news hit the waiting room, Richard wept. He was ecstatic, completely overwhelmed. The moment the babies were cleaned, he immediately ordered the medical team to run the DNA tests. Outside the suite, Bernice was spiraling into a full-blown panic. She knew the stakes. If those 4 babies belonged to her father, she would have to drop to her knees, grovel at my feet, and willingly forfeit every last cent of the Kerwin empire. She paced the halls, muttering desperate prayers that I was a fraud. Hours later, Richard burst into my recovery suite, waving the thick stack of lab results, tears streaming down his face. They're mine. My boys. My little girl. They have the Kerwin blood. His booming laughter echoed down the halls. 4 of them. I have 4 beautiful children. For a man who had conquered the financial world but resigned himself to dying without a legacy, the arrival of 4 biological heirs was like being handed the keys to the universe. He was radiating pure, blinding joy. Out in the hall, the anxiety finally broke Bernice. She doubled over, violently throwing up into a trash can. Richard stepped out of the room, looking at Bernice with sheer revulsion. What the hell was wrong with her? Throwing up outside the maternity ward on the happiest day of his life. It felt like a deliberate curse. If you're sick, go check yourself into a clinic, he snapped coldly. Stop making a scene outside my wife's door. Bernice wiped her mouth, her eyes wide and frantic. Right. I need a doctor. An on-call physician took her down the hall for an exam. 20 minutes later, the doctor walked out looking surprised. Bernice was pregnant. In a matter of seconds, Bernice's despair vanished, replaced by a soaring euphoric rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was her ace in the hole. She might have promised to give up her share of the inheritance, but she never said anything about her child's share. She figured there was no way Richard could turn his back on his first grandchild. The Kerwin fortune would still flow into her pockets. A sickeningly triumphant smile spread across her face. She practically sprinted back toward my room, throwing the door open.
Dad.
Dad, I'm pregnant, she shrieked, her voice echoing with pride. I'm carrying your grandchild. You're going to be a grandfather. She stood there, glowing with the absolute certainty that she had just flipped the chessboard and won the game. But as her words faded, a suffocating, dead silence fell over the room. Every single pair of eyes turned to stare at her. The air grew so thick you could cut it with a knife. Bernice's smile slowly faltered. She looked around, her heart pounding against her ribs. Why wasn't anyone celebrating? Why did Derek look like he had just been shot? She had timed her grand entrance flawlessly right in the middle of a very private conversation. I was sitting up in bed, looking at Richard with absolute serenity, finishing the sentence she had interrupted. Duh. And that's the truth, Richard. My ex-husband suffers from severe infertility. Medically, he is entirely incapable of fathering a child. Bernice's announcement had just dropped like a nuclear bomb in the center of the room. If Derek was sterile, then whose baby was Bernice carrying? Derek froze. His entire body locked up as the realization hit him. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. His knees buckled, and without a single word, he hit the linoleum floor out cold. Richard slowly stood up from the edge of my bed. The look in his eyes wasn't even anger anymore. It was pure, icy finality. You would fake a pregnancy with another man's child just to get your hands on my money, Richard said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You really are something else, Bernice. Bernice was trembling so violently, she could barely stand. She clutched the fabric of her dress, gasping for air. Dad, no, I just... Richard raised a hand, cutting her off instantly. Save it. I'm telling you this once, and I will never repeat it. When I die, every single asset, property, and dollar I own will go to my 4 children and their mother. You will not see a dime. Now get the hell out of my hospital.
He didn't yell.
He didn't have to. The quiet authority in his voice completely shattered her. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Richard turned back to me. The ice in his eyes melted into profound guilt and tenderness. I am so sorry, he whispered, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. I'm sorry you had to endure all of this nonsense. I leaned into his touch, offering a soft, forgiving smile. It's okay, I have everything I need right here.
And I meant it.
The Kerwin empire, the man, the children, it was all mine now. While I spent my days wrapped in the luxurious, peaceful bubble of postpartum recovery, life on the outside was tearing my enemies apart. Bernice had initially convinced herself that even without her inheritance, life wouldn't be so bad. Derek owned a tech company. After all, she thought she was still marrying into wealth. What she didn't know was that before the divorce was finalized, I had systematically gutted the company. I transferred the majority of the liquid assets out and poached every single competent executive and engineer we had. Derek was a fraud. Without me pulling the strings in the background, he couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a tech firm. Facing imminent bankruptcy and desperate to keep up appearances for Bernice, he made the fatal mistake of taking out loans from some very dangerous underground lenders. He even tried to forge my signature as a guarantor. I laughed out loud when my private investigator brought me the news. Did he really think I was going to let him sink quietly? I anonymously forwarded Derek's real updated address and financial records directly to the loan sharks. The very next afternoon, 3 men the size of refrigerators kicked down the glass doors of Derek's empty office. Where the fuck is our money? The leader roared, smashing a computer monitor to the floor. Derek was dragged out from under his desk, hoisted into the air by his collar. You've got 3 days. The man spat in his face. If you don't pay up, we start breaking bones. But the deadline isn't for another month. Derek sobbed, utterly terrified. Someone tipped us off that you're broke as a joke. So we're calling the debt in early. Got a problem with that? Derek shook his head frantically, tears streaming down his face. By the time the men left, the office was completely trashed. The few remaining loyal employees took one look at their wreckage, packed up their desks, and walked out. Derek's company officially became an empty, worthless shell. But Bernice was still technically Richard's daughter on paper. A decades-long bond couldn't be severed overnight, and Richard, despite his fury, was still depositing a modest monthly allowance into her account. I knew he still harbored a sliver of guilt over her parents' death, but I didn't give him time to dwell on it. One evening, as we sat by the fire, I took his hand, guided it to my slightly rounded stomach, and whispered, "I'm pregnant again." Meanwhile, Derek's mother, my former mother-in-law, a woman who thrived on chaos and entitlement, was making Bernice's life a living hell. I made sure an anonymous tip reached her, letting her know that Bernice had been permanently written out of the Kerwin will. The very next morning, the old woman showed up at the gates of the Kerwin estate, throwing herself onto the driveway and screaming at the top of her lungs. "Look at these heartless monsters," she shrieked, drawing the attention of the neighbors. A father abandoning his own daughter for a home-wrecking whore. Bernice ran out, her face burning with humiliation, desperately trying to drag the old woman up from the concrete. Her mother-in-law slapped Bernice's hands away, glaring at her with pure disgust. "This is your fault. You let that bitch take your money. If I don't come out here and fight for it, who's going to feed our family? You." Bernice stood there paralyzed by the sheer degrading reality of her life, watching the woman writhe on the ground. Richard's black SUV pulled through the gates. He stepped out, his face like thunder. "That's enough," he said, his voice vibrating with rage. "Do you think you can extort me? Bernice has absolutely nothing to do with me anymore. She is no longer my daughter. If you ever show your faces at my property again, I will have you arrested." Security guards practically threw the two women into the street. Watching the security footage later, I felt a deep, dark sense of satisfaction. In my past life, I had bowed and scraped to that awful old woman. I bought her luxury bags, paid for her vacations, cooked her meals, only for her to help sweep my murder under the rug. Karma was a beautiful thing. Cut off from the Kerwin money, Derek's family turned entirely on Bernice. She became their punching bag. Her glamorous, elite life was gone, replaced by endless screaming matches, debt collectors banging on the door, and the smell of cheap beer. At the same time, the society pages exploded with news of my upcoming wedding. Richard was throwing the most extravagant ceremony New York had seen in a decade, officially crowning me the matriarch of the Kerwin Empire. The woman Bernice had looked down on her entire life was stepping into the role she believed was hers. Pushed to the absolute brink of insanity by the loan sharks and the humiliation, Bernice snapped. She hired the very men who were extorting Derek to kidnap me. I was ambushed outside a boutique, struck hard in the back of the head, and thrown into the back of a van. When I finally opened my eyes, the smell of rust and mold filled my lungs. I was tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. Bernice stood in front of me, her hair matted, her eyes manic and bloodshot. "You bitch, you filthy, lucky bitch," she screamed, pacing wildly. "Why does everything always work out for you? Even in the foster home, everyone loved you. The rich families always wanted you first." She stopped, leaning in close, her breath hot on my face. "I had to become the billionaire's daughter. And yet, you just wouldn't disappear. You went to the same schools, you got better grades, you built a better company. And then you married that loser Derek. I thought, finally she's dragged down to the bottom where she belongs. But no, you made him a success. Why the hell are you so lucky?" My blood ran cold. The adoptions. For years, I wondered why every family that wanted me suddenly backed out. It was her. Bernice had sabotaged me even when we were children. But in my past life, her jealousy had cost me my life. This time, I was simply returning the favor. "Today, I'm going to remind you exactly who you are," Bernice sneered, pulling a hunting knife from her jacket. "You're nothing. And you will never, ever be above me." She gripped the handle of the knife tight. "Don't worry. The little parasite in your stomach is coming with you." I looked at her, my expression utterly calm. "Aren't you afraid of what your father will do to you?" Bernice let out a hollow, psychotic laugh. "My father? He's not my real dad. He never put me first. Once I kill you, and I kill those brats you pushed out, I'll be the only child he has left." And then she trailed off, her eyes shining with madness. "And then what?" A voice echoed from the shadows. Bernice froze. Richard stepped into the dim light of the warehouse, flanked by a dozen heavily armed private security contractors. Dad, what are you doing here?" Bernice whispered, the knife slipping from her trembling fingers and clattering to the floor. I instantly dropped my calm facade. Tears flooded my eyes, and my entire body began to violently shake. "Richard," I sobbed, my voice shattering. "I was so scared, I thought I was never going to see you again." The sound of my terrified crying broke whatever restraint Richard had left. He rushed forward, falling to his knees as he frantically untied the ropes binding my wrists. He pulled me against his chest, burying his face in my hair, holding me like I was made of spun glass. I'm so sorry, he choked out. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. I've got you. I'll always protect you. Watching us, Bernice completely lost her grip on reality. She lunged forward, trying to rip me out of Richard's arms. Dad, you have to listen to me. She made me say those things. She's setting me up. Don't believe her. I let out a piercing shriek, burying my face into Richard's neck. Keep her away from me, please. Richard's face hardened into a mask of pure, lethal fury. As Bernice lunged, he stood up and delivered a brutal kick squarely to her stomach. Bernice flew backward, hitting the concrete floor hard. She curled into a fetal position, gasping for air, unable to stand. I watched the light die in Richard's eyes. Any lingering trace of paternal love he held for her was permanently extinguished. He stared down at her, his voice devoid of any emotion. Thank God for Helen. If she hadn't come into my life, I'd have kept spoiling you. I can only imagine what you would have done to me eventually to get your hands on my money. Bernice clutched her stomach, sobbing hysterically as a dark stain began to spread across her jeans.
Dad, no.
It's not true. I never wanted you dead. She looked down at the blood pooling beneath her. Panic seized her throat. Dad, please. I'm sorry, I know I was wrong. Help me. Please, save my baby. Enough. Richard roared. He flicked his wrist, and the security contractors immediately surrounded her. I won't send you to prison, Richard said, his voice ice cold. That is the absolute last act of mercy you will ever receive from me. You made your bed. You married that man. Go live the life you chose. The guards dragged Bernice out of the warehouse by her arms. She kicked and screamed, her voice tearing as she begged. No. Dad, please don't throw me away. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her screams faded into the night. Bernice was dumped back onto Derek's doorstep. Mascari the baby, which, ironically, wasn't even Derek's to begin with. The loss severed the very last thread holding their toxic marriage together. Their life became an endless cycle of vicious fights, poverty, and misery. The proud, untouchable billionaire heiress was completely shattered. She became a ghost of a woman, begging for scraps on the streets she used to look down upon. As for me, Richard made good on his promise. Our wedding was held at the Kerwin private estate in the Hamptons. The grounds were transformed into a sprawling, breathtaking dreamscape of white roses and crystal. Richard stood at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. As I walked toward him in a custom haute couture gown, the long silk train gliding over the petals, the look of absolute adoration in his eyes took my breath away. Under the floral arch, we exchanged our vows. As he pulled me in for a kiss, his arms wrapped securely around my waist, he leaned down and whispered against my lips. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me a life I will spend every breath I have loving you, protecting you, and giving you the world. I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. I had won. I had everything I was owed and so much more. And the best part? The rest of our lives was just beginning.
Alright guys, moral of the story? Buckle up. If your best friend steals your man, don't cry, upgrade to her dad, secure generational wealth, and respawn like it's a revenge speedrun. But also, don't underestimate quiet people with trauma and a business degree. If someone says, we're like sisters, start checking your stairs. And most importantly, never start drama with someone who has both a master plan and good fertility stats. Final takeaway? Play stupid games, win stepmom. Like, subscribe,